Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Amplifying Authenticity. Today's guest is Dr. Jeffrey Quebec, an educational consultant, podcast host, and the founder of Quebec Consulting. Dr. Quebec brings a unique perspective shaped by years of experience in both broadcasting and education. From his time as a sportscaster at Syracuse University to conducting thousands of interviews as an admissions officer, his career has been centered around communication, connection, and understanding how people present themselves. Today, he works with individuals and families through his consulting practice, helping them navigate educational pathways and opportunities. In this conversation, we explore communication as a leadership skill, what authenticity looks like in different contexts, and how experience shapes confidence over time. Dr. Quebec, I'm so glad you're here. Welcome to Amplifying Authenticity.
Well, thank you very much, Megan. It's certainly a pleasure to be here. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So I know when we had our initial call just to chat and check in, we found a lot of synergies. And I want to start with your foundation before we go into those synergies, because a lot of your more recent experience aligns with a lot of my experiences, but your earlier experiences are vastly different from mine. So I'd love to start with your early experience in broadcasting and just can you tell our audience a little bit more about your time as a sportscaster at Syracuse?
Absolutely. I think, certainly being a sportscaster at WJPZ in Syracuse was a phenomenal opportunity. And the opportunity to interview people and many people that you might know, famous people. And that's not always easy for someone, especially being a young adolescent coming out of high school and being a student in college and going up to famous people and conducting interviews. And whether it be in a group with other reporters or doing it one-on-one. It was
Absolutely.
It was an awesome experience.
That's amazing. And what's interesting is we talk a lot about, especially on my podcast, we have a lot of speakers, right? But we don't always talk about the art of listening. And for me, listening is so powerful. I'm a speaker. However, I believe listening is so much more important than speaking. And as a sportscaster, interviewing famous people, having those conversations, I would venture to think, maybe I'm going out on a limb here, but listening is pretty important for that role as well, right?
Absolutely. And I think a couple things. One is, I think, in addition to listening, I think it's also important how to use your body language. So your body language can certainly help to get reaction from the person that you're interviewing, whether it be a simple nod of the head or just other gestures. And it does make a big difference, I believe, when you're conducting an interview.
Absolutely. So how can you tell the difference when you're watching body language? How can you tell the difference between someone who is genuinely engaged compared to someone who's just kind of going with the movements?
Well, that definitely occurs sometimes after a tough sporting event and someone maybe they didn't have the results they want, especially in a loss, where they may not be too happy, but they're going through the motions because they sort of have to do it, have to face the media. But now they're thinking to themselves, I just want to get out of here. I'm not happy and it's time to go home. So usually that becomes pretty obvious. It doesn't take too much to figure that one out.
Right. One of the things I find interesting about authenticity, which is what we talk a lot about on this podcast, is just how people define authenticity. And in our pre-conversation, as we were talking, I realized that you don't necessarily define authenticity as one thing.
I think you're right. I think it really varies. I mean, certainly being authentic, I think authentic to yourself and others, being genuine, being real, being true.
Yeah. And part of being real and being true is being flexible, right?
I 100% agree with that. And that's something that I'm often coaching the students I work with because they're going before a competitive admissions process where it's really important to be authentic and that the school's trying to get an idea of who is this student. We see who the student maybe is on paper, but now we have an opportunity to meet face-to-face or maybe over Zoom and learn as much as we can about this child.
Yeah, and that's a great segue into what you're doing now, right? So tell our audience a little bit more about what you're doing. When you said students are going in front of admissions, but what exactly are you helping students and their families do with your company?
So Megan, as an educational consultant, I work with students and families from not only all over the United States, but all over the world. So as they hired me through Quebec Consulting, the first thing I do is I do a deep dive to learn as much as I can about the child through the lens of the parent or parents. and find out what their strengths are. What are the areas that maybe they need to work on or things they need to improve? And then I also spend time with the child themselves and not in the presence of other adults, meaning that it would be very difficult to have a conversation with a young boy or girl and maybe have a parent leaning over their shoulder. It might be a little intimidating. And so I often ask many of the similar questions, but from their lens and their perspective. And then I put together a list of schools or programs I may think would be a good fit for them. And I spend time discussing with them and sort of trying to find the right fit. And I always say to families, what's the right fit for one boy or girl? It doesn't mean it's right fit for your son or daughter. And then through that process, I'm guiding them through everything from the interview preparation, the application, the essays. I'm certainly not writing essays for students, but I'm helping guide them and make sure that they're really putting their best foot forward. And it may be something as simple as Megan is saying, maybe you want to go in a different direction. Maybe this is not what we want to write about. Or you told me this story when we first met. This might be a great story to use for this essay question. But really helping them navigate that process. And I guess the analogy I would make is if you or I were going for an interview and you're going before another adult and being drilled with questions, you may be nervous. You might be a little intimidated. But never mind being a younger student, that can be extremely intimidating to have an adult essentially drill you with questions. And so, getting back to your original comment of being authentic, that's extremely important. And that's really what schools are looking for.
Yeah, I'm curious. I know you shared the story with me, but I think it would be a great story to share with the audience as well. How did you learn about this opportunity, or how did you first get introduced to the concept of boarding schools or programs for students?
Well, I'm a proud product of public school. I think I had a great experience as a student growing up. I wouldn't change it in a minute, but I think at the end of the day, unfortunately, public schools today are not what they used to be. And my sister and I went to public school, and my younger brother went to an independent boarding school. And when my brother Greg went off to Deerfield Academy in Deerfield, Massachusetts, that was a wonderful opportunity for him. It was important for my parents to not only for in this case, their son to be at a strong school academically, but also be in a position where he could continue to grow and continue to develop. One of his interests were ice hockey, and that led to him having some opportunities to go on to the next ranks and play collegiately. And I remember going to visit him, and I was really intrigued by what's all this boarding school about. And having grown up outside of Boston, I knew about boarding schools, but most people didn't necessarily go to boarding school. Maybe they went to some local day schools, but not boarding schools. And I would visit him, and it's something I really became intrigued in and quite interested in. I applied and was started my first job. I working in Deerfield, Mass, but it was at Eaglebrook School, which is a leading junior boarding school. And went back to school, got my master's, and during that time, I moved up the ranks into admissions and started working with educational consultants. So I think that's also something that gives me a different perspective, is I've been on the other side of the desk. And I know what goes on during the admissions process, and whether it be the interview process or even just the entire application and decision-making process. And then moved up the ranks in administration, and later on, I went back to school, got my doctorate degree. So my doctoral dissertation is on the values and benefits of independent boarding school. And if you were to do some research, Megan, as I've done in boarding schools, first of all, there's not a lot of research that has been done. And much of the research is quite negative. And it's what sells in Hollywood. It's what's going to be a fancy book or movie, or things you might read about in Harry Potter, or maybe see in the movie School Ties. And so an opportunity to really showcase the positive aspect of boarding schools and the many success stories that occur each and every day. And then during that time, I sort of decided that this would be an opportunity to be a consultant and really help and guide families that are trying to find that right fit. And that's not always easy to navigate that.
Right. Now, I worked in many public schools. I went to public school myself. And when I became a consultant, I started doing some work in charter schools. And I told people all the time that I wish that charter schools didn't have to exist, right? I wish that our public schools were doing everything they needed to so that we didn't need to have charter schools. And at the same time, I realized that public schools, as you said it, are not what they used to be. And I used to say something very similar about charter schools as what you're saying with boarding schools, is that I ran into some phenomenal charter schools, and I ran into some charter schools that were not that great. And I think there's a spectrum, as in everything in our world, there's a spectrum of good and not so good. Now, one of the things when we first started talking, you taught me quite a bit because even though I have an extensive background in education, retired as a school superintendent, I did not know how many boarding schools were local. I only thought that boarding schools were for students in Europe or for students who had an army background or a special services background or students who were struggling with discipline. So they were sent off to a boarding school, right? I never knew that there were boarding schools and even some boarding schools right in my backyard that I know of the school very well. I thought it was just a private school. I didn't realize it was actually a boarding school. What kinds of information do you have, or what questions do you encourage parents or maybe even students to ask themselves if they want to know more about whether or not a boarding school is a good fit for them?
I think, what you say is absolutely right, because most people, what you may, if you're, unless you're a product of boarding school or you had a family member who attended, you may not be familiar with that. And even like you said, you maybe lived near a boarding school and you just weren't really sure what was going on on that campus. So I think as I work with families, I think it's important that they ask the questions. And I tell students all the time, there's no such thing as a wrong question, or ask the tough questions. Don't be afraid. Don't hold back, because this is a serious investment, not only financially, but for parents to entrust the school with their child. And so when it comes to specific questions, I think there are maybe some bad questions. And what I mean by that, when I coach the students, you wouldn't want to be asking questions that would clearly show you haven't done your homework, right? Maybe you're asking about a certain department of academics or athletics, and literally for the last 2 weeks, there's been a front page story on their website about it. That wouldn't be a good look. And so it's not the idea about doing a deep dive. And anytime you can ask a question that also shows a school that you have done your homework, maybe you're looking for a further follow-up. I happened to see recently a post on your Instagram page about a robotics competition that the students were involved in. And I'm really interested in robotics. Perhaps you could tell me more about that. So twofold, you've shared with them the fact that you've done some homework, but you're looking to do a deeper dive. And these schools are looking for students that are going to come on their campus, they're going to get involved, because there is so many wonderful opportunities in the campus. They want to see students that aren't just one-dimensionalized. And Megan, in today's day and age, unfortunately, we have a lot of students that are specializing, right? Specializations become a big thing, whether it be in athletics, visual arts, performing arts, et cetera. And so the idea that you're willing to, or you are diversified, or you're willing to be, and also try new things. And a lot of that can come out in the interview. Like, wow, I was walking through your science labs and I was just so impressed with this opportunities in chemistry. And I'd love to take a class like that. Finding out more about it. So I think, things like that. And there's also the all-important adolescent questions like, how's the food? Is it any good here? Right? Because if you're going to be living there, I think that's quite important. But I don't think that's your lead question. I wouldn't be leading in with the question of how's the food. But there's nothing wrong with asking that. And then lastly, I think I would say, Megan, in regards to asking questions, is I always share with students and parents, it is okay to ask the same question of multiple people. So if you had a tour on campus and you have a fellow student who's going to tour you around campus, you can ask that child a question and certainly going to answer it from their perspective. But that may be different from the adult or the admissions officer once you return into the admissions office. And so feel free to ask that same question. And they're not going to know that you just asked the student tour guide that question.
Right. And I also, my experience, although not boarding school, but I just did a college tour with my son, right? And colleges are basically boarding schools. They're going off and they're living on campus and taking class they're leaving their parents' home, right? So I think of college as the extended boarding school to an extent, right? So similar questions of when a child is picking a college campus, asking the questions. And I know on the college tour, I encourage my son, ask the question of what do you like most about the campus, or why did you choose this school, of as many people as you can, because everyone's perspective is different.
Absolutely. You're totally right. Yep. And similarly with the food question, right? So you can ask that food question of a student, but unbeknownst to you, they've got significant allergies. So they have, maybe they're a really picky eater. And so often when I ask that question, if I were to ask a person of a student, I will ask them, if I were to ask 20, 30 students on campus about the food, what would they say, or how might they grade it? So pose it in a way where you're asking to sort of what's the majority thinking, not what that specific student's thinking. And generally, like on that question, the students are unbelievably brutally honest, which is awesome.
Right.
And you're not trying to
that
ask
question reminds me. I'm sorry?
I said, you're not trying to ask gotcha questions. You're not trying to, bust anyone's
Right.
chops, but you're just trying to learn as much as you can about the school.
Yeah. And that honestly, when you just said that, totally off topic, but this is what I do. I remember when I was waitressing and people would ask, "Oh, what about this menu item?" Or do people, I would always answer with, "I don't personally like it, but it's a top seller." Or we have people who come to the restaurant specifically for that, right? Because if I just gave my opinion, that's not necessarily, not everyone's going to have the same taste buds, right? For me, as long as there's bacon, cheese, and butter, it's probably going to taste good to me. So I just, I always, and totally off topic, right? But that's something that reminds me of how much we just have to be authentic with who we are, not lie to sell something, right? Because I think everything we do, every communication that we have is selling something to an extent, whether it's selling ourselves as people, whether it's selling the service we offer, whether it's selling a school because we want them to go there, we're all selling to an extent. But if we treat it like that, then we're not being authentic. But if we treat it like, I just want to share my opinion, my honest opinion, and if it aligns with yours, great. If not, I'd love to learn about your opinion.
When you think about it, Megan, as you mentioned, going through the college process with your son, as he visited schools and campuses, he's learning so much. He's asking the questions. And if he just were to look at their school's website and make a decision, you can't go by that. Who's got the pretty pictures? Who's got the great taglines? That's not the reason to choose a school. And so there is no replacement to actually physically get on campus. And sometimes it's that gut instinct feel. So maybe when you and your son got in the car afterwards, and the first thing you might say is each other, like, what do you think? Right? And you're having this conversation back and forth. That's essential.
We didn't even make it to the car, Jeff.
There you go. Yeah, I hear you. But it's important to have that conversation because a lot of times it is the gut instinct, the same gut instinct feeling someone may have if they're purchasing a vehicle or exploring to purchase a house. You might not be able to eloquently put in writing, but you just have the feeling that this is the one, or, I just don't think so. This doesn't seem like it's going to be a right fit. And the caveat I always say to students and parents about this is two major factors in that experience. One is the tour guide, because you just may not click with that tour guide. You're asking some of those great questions, and maybe you're really into theater. And unbeknownst to you, the tour guide has never stepped foot in the theater. In fact, doesn't even know where on campus it is, and just really could care less. So obviously, you're not going to get the answers you want, unfortunately, but that can happen. Yeah. And the second factor is the weather. Don't underestimate the weather. Let's just say it's raining and it's coming down sideways and the wind is howling versus that beautiful, bright, sunny day. And the other thing that can occur that you may not even know is that maybe there's a couple of buildings you never even saw because the tour guide's thinking like, oh, I want to get back here because I'm just miserable out here doing this tour in the pouring rain. And you missed out on some opportunity versus the sunny stroll, and you're able to be maybe a little more relaxed, all parties involved.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm curious, how do you, on a daily basis, make sure that you're being authentic in the interactions you have, whether it's with your students, with the schools you're building relationships with families? How do you really embrace that authenticity within yourself?
Well, I think some of it's my personality, just being myself. And I also think that I've got the best of both worlds because certainly I'm working with the students' parents and working with adults, maybe more on a, obviously an adult level, but I'm also working with the adolescent youth. And for me, that can be anything from, say, a pre-kindergarten all the way to seniors in high school. So I don't work with students who are looking for college universities opportunities, but I might have a senior who's looking for a PG or a postgraduate year or a gap year. So that's where the senior comes into play. And I think really just, being honest, being authentic. And then when I'm working with the schools, it's also my reputation. I would just say to any family, any parent is that I can't make a promise or guarantee that a student's going to get accepted to a certain school. But I can share with you that my students do really, really well. And so my success is when come decision day, the student has multiple accepts. And versus all of a sudden, if they had a bunch of waitlist or rejects, that's not going to be a happy day and they're not going to be happy with me. And so while I can't make that promise, it's important for me to work hard and be authentic with the school and, put forth, my students and present them in a way that's authentic and it's honest, it's real. And I guess the college or university analogy I'd make that some people would be able to relate to is that if you had a student who had some academic challenges and maybe wasn't faring as well academically throughout their time as a student in middle school, high school, et cetera, you certainly wouldn't be going to the dean at Harvard University and saying, I've got a great fit for you. I have an awesome student. Because that's also my reputation, because this is not a good fit. That wouldn't be the right fit for that child.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that goes a lot with, being authentic is, really be genuine. You got to be honest. I think that's really important. And,
Right.
so, and that's something I appreciate. But also coaching the students and coaching the parents, because there is a process to it.
And I also wonder if your experience of going from broadcasting to working in the education environment to being a consultant, and I hope you don't mind me saying, but it wasn't necessarily a straight line. It wasn't a linear path, right? How did that own trajectory of yourself and those transitions help you really solidify what your purpose was in this stage of your life?
I think for me, first and foremost, I'm a people person. And I think that's where the common thread is right there, is the idea that I just knew that I cannot be someone who sits behind a desk all day long. And I learned that really early on in college, and the ability to work, whether it be younger adolescent students who I love working with and helping out, or adults. And early in my career, when I came out of college, and I started working at a boarding school, and I was working at Eagle Brook School in Deerfield, I really was doing what they call in boarding school, they call it triple threat. And so the triple threat is being a teacher, a coach, and a dormitory house parent. And I think it's awesome. And, while I mentioned earlier that in today's day and age, a lot of younger adolescents are into specialization, where, I play soccer, I do indoor soccer, I do outdoor soccer, I go to soccer tournaments, I do soccer showcases, all I do is soccer. And I read soccer books, and I watch soccer movies. And, I think I fear for students to go down those avenues and become so specialized. And so for me, I've had, I think, phenomenal opportunities. And I think in many ways, they have been natural progressions. I've traveled to about 75 countries. I've been all over the world. And so, when I go to these countries, it's about the food, the culture, the language, and you learn so much. And especially now working in consultant, where I have clients from all over the world. I think it gives you a really good appreciation of where they're coming from.
Right. I'd love for you to tell us a story about your why. Why do you do the work you do?
Yeah, for me, it's, as I said earlier, it's definitely about the students. It's about helping them find the opportunity. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, what's the right fit for one boy or girl doesn't mean it's right for your son or daughter. And that can be quite overwhelming. It can be quite overwhelming for the student, for the family, and hence one of the reasons why they hire me. And I think to have that type of impact, and for me, there's nothing more rewarding than hearing, and not only the child being accepted to schools and having options. That's about life. Life is about having choices, having options, but getting the feedback afterwards. And while it's great to hear from the parents, it is unbelievably rewarding when you receive often maybe a quick text or an email from a student thanking you or filling you in how things are going.
Yeah. Was there a pivotal moment for you, though, like that light switch of this is why I do this? Is there a story you can share of one particular student, or just really let us into your world?
Yeah, I honestly, I don't think there's one particular student, just because I started working with students in 1994. So I probably have a lot of students. But it's pretty cool when you maybe get a note. It might even be on LinkedIn, a note of someone you haven't connected with in a lot of years, and they reach out to you. And often it's a note of checking in how you're doing, but also a note of thanks. And I think that's pretty powerful. And just not to pivot too much, but I'll share with you in regards to that. I also own a company called the Pre-Prep Showcase, which gives boys and girls the opportunity to get exposure to prep schools through ice hockey. And a couple of years ago, I got a random note on LinkedIn from a woman who wanted to become involved in my program. Happens once a year in the summertime. And she wanted to help out and maybe do some coaching. And I politely shared with her, and oh, by the way, she's also an alum of the program. So in her way, it was a way of giving back. And I politely shared with her that unfortunately, in order to participate, you have to be a coach at one of these schools. I'm just not hiring coaches off the street. But the message that she sent me was so nice and so powerful. I wanted to pick up the phone, and I had to speak with her. And in the conversation, she shared with her experience of having gone to the Pre-Prep Showcase as a young adolescent. And then from there, it gave her an opportunity to go on to a boarding school. She ended up going on to a very selective New England boarding school. And then from there, went on to one of the Ivy Leagues and continued to play ice hockey through her Ivy League years. And then after that, she became a practicing attorney after going to law school. And today, she's currently a coach. And she said, well, I have some students who could participate. Can I bring them up? I said, absolutely. And the more I thought about it, I said, this is a unique situation because it's pretty powerful to have someone reaching out to you who wants to give back. And they felt that you had an impact in their life. And so what I did was I asked her to be on the panel, and she was awesome. And I read her bio, And the one thing I also did is I did a little research in my my emails and old files, and I found an email that her father had written back in the day thanking me. And this is when she was a
Wow.
young adolescent girl, of thanking me of how much it helped to shape her, who she was. At the time, she was in high school, or might have been going off to college at that point. And I shared that with her. And it was a pretty emotional time, I think, for both of us. And that's for me, that's what it's about. It's being able to help shape the lives. And I think at the end of the day, in this case, whether it was her being an ice hockey goalie and now being a practicing attorney who's giving back by coaching young women,
Right.
is at the end of the day, it comes down to education. And I think that's what's most important. And if I can have an impact on your
Absolutely.
education, that means a lot to me.
Absolutely. I know, and the reason why I asked that so much, because those stories right there are what people remember, right? I think, especially being an educator, being a teacher, a lot of people go into teaching because they want to, just like my wall says, right? They want to be the change they want to see in the world. They want to impact the youth. They believe in the power of our future. All of those things are not hollow. They're very true and they resonate. And the story is what people will remember, right? That story of what was that one child, right? For me, it was the moment. Like, I've always loved what I've done. And I started doing this work before my son was born. Now he's going to be 16 this summer, right? But I remember he was 9 years old and he said, "Mom, I'm so proud of you." And I was like, "Well, thank you, but why?" Because I always told him he's not allowed to give a compliment without saying why or what it's for, right? Like, good job means nothing. You have to say what they're doing a good job on, right? Or what they're, whatever it is. He said, "You're making the world a better place for people who look like me."
Wow. That's powerful. That's really powerful.
That moment, every time I reflect and say, "Oh my gosh, this is a hard day. I don't know if I can do this, the socio-political climate, whatever it is. I don't know if I can keep doing this. Maybe I should just get a job, right? Maybe I work for somebody else again." I remember his face. I remember what he was wearing. And to this day, he still will, "Oh, Mom, today I really like that podcast you did with this person." Or he's so engaged and he's so proud. And allowed myself to embrace that and accept that, because I think so many of us, especially people who are doing very service-based work, are so humble, almost to a fault, that we're not allowed to be proud of ourselves. And for whatever reason, because it's from my son, I'm allowing myself to be proud of the work I've done, knowing that it's all for him and that he actually sees that.
Well, Megan, that's certainly a tribute to you and the upbringing that he's had, and you as his mother. That's awesome.
It's the village, right? And I think part of being authentic is I knew from a very early age that I wanted to be a parent. I remember playing house when I was a young child, and I always wanted to be a mom. And I knew I was meant to be a mom. When people asked, "What are you going to be when you grow up?" I said, "Well, I'm going to be a mom. And I'll probably be a doctor or a lawyer too," right? But that was, as a kid, I was going to be a doctor or a lawyer. But I always wanted to be a mom. And I struggled to be a mom. I experienced multiple miscarriages. I struggled tremendously. So I am very blessed with the one child I have. And I appreciate it so much more because I've known forever that being a mom was my purpose. Everything else I do is just helping me be a better mom.
What a
And
great
I
story.
think when we can find, right? So for you, when you're working with your students, when you can find that thing that lights them up, that piece that they're excited about, whether it's a location for the school, whether it's a certain professor that just aligns with motivating who they can become in life, but just finding that one thing, everything else is successful because of that one central point. And to me, that's what authenticity is if you can find that central moment in your life and everything aligns, maybe perpendicular, maybe in a sideways way, but everything aligns with that one purpose in your life. And I think the biggest thing we can do as people is to help others uncover that purpose.
I couldn't agree more. I think, Megan, it's so rewarding for me. Another example would be a student who's going through the process, and it's competitive, and they're visiting schools, and then all of a sudden a parent reports back to me where they've seen the child elevate their performance academically, maybe put more time into their studies, maybe they're reading more. It's those little things that have a huge impact and really help to shape that child. And one of the things that
Yeah.
boarding schools do such a phenomenal job is, I always say, so much of the education at a boarding school is beyond the four walls of the classroom. Because I've never seen a school, public or private, where someone's going to say, yeah, our English department, yeah, it's okay, but it's not the greatest. I mean, generally that's not going to happen.
Right.
But the idea that these students are living, eating, playing on this campus, and the interactions they have, whether it be in the dining hall with a group of students, and the conversation is maybe being led or maybe not being led by an adult, or in the dormitory, or just hanging out with your friends.
Yeah.
You're spending so much time together. And, we talk about diversity. We talk about diversity on campuses and schools, et cetera. Well, often we think we forget about in diversity is the idea of diversity of thought. So when you have a classroom that's diverse of students from all over the US, all over the world, and maybe a topic's being brought up in history about a certain subject that maybe dates back a couple hundred years, the different perspectives that are brought to that conversation is awesome. And so not only the students learning from each other, but also the faculty, the teachers, they're learning from each other. And it's a really powerful, I think it's a powerful opportunity. And for these younger generation to be connected with students from all over the world, and especially those that they've been born and raised with the internet and social media, it's so much easier to stay connected with their classmate from Tokyo, or someone coming from Johannesburg, South Africa. I mean, how cool is that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And diversity of thought is not something that's only important for our children. It's right now with the socio-political climate attacking diversity and DEI, I think the main crux of it all is diversity of thought leads to more creativity. Because if you have groupthink, if you all have similar lived experiences, you will have groupthink. And that means you're never thinking outside the box. And if you look at the companies and the brands who have been the most successful, it's because they've taken a chance. They've done something that other people have said, that's never going to work, or you shouldn't be doing that. They're the ones who said, you know what, I believe in myself, or I believe in my team, or we're going to try something completely different and we're going to make it happen.
Megan, you can say black, I can say white, and we can go back and forth and discuss the merits of each of our opinions and strong, values. But then we come to the conclusion that really it should be gray. And how cool is that? And I think that is a beautiful thing, especially when you're having that sort of diversity of thought that takes place day in and day out. The success stories that take place on these campuses of boarding schools is phenomenal. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do my dissertation about that, is because they need to be shared with others.
Yeah. And it's not about listening to each other's perspective or sharing each other's perspective to prove who's right or wrong. It's to say, I have a different experience. Can I share mine? And it sounds like you've had a different experience. Can you share yours? Can we learn from each other? Can we understand what might be some similar foundation points in the middle of that, right? I believe that there is a pool of shared meaning in every conversation. Even if you think two people could not be any more different from each other, there's always a pool of shared meaning. There is something in the middle that is consistent with both arguments. And if we can approach a conversation as two different perspectives to learn from instead of an argument or things that we have to prove right or wrong, and instead just come with let's learn from one another, we would do so much better as a society. Absolutely.
And that's a perfect example of authenticity, and also feeling safe, feeling comfortable. It's okay to share my opinions and my values. Not saying one's better than the other, but to have that conversation, I think it's pretty special, and boarding schools do a great job at that.
Absolutely. Love that. All right. Are you ready for our lightning round? Quick questions. All right. So first one, in your opinion, what builds confidence faster, preparation or experience?
I think experience. I think, certainly over the years, one of the things I say about confidence is I think biologically, a lot of times boys don't always mature as quick as girls. And the maturity level is a different stage. And I think the opportunity for both the boys and the girls to have exposure to continue to grow and develop their confidence. I guess an example I would make is, say you were to tell me your son's an awesome math student. If I put your son in a classroom of a bunch of students from different parts of the globe who are like off the chart in math, your son might be like, whoa, mom, maybe I'm not as good at math as I thought I was. And so I think it's really important to find that right environment and that right fit. And that's through experience, I think, to grow their confidence.
Love that. If people take one thing away, or one thing that they can focus on, when they're presenting themselves, whether in an interview, conversation? What is one thing that you believe everyone could do to ramp up their ability to present themselves?
Well, I think certainly as your, title of your podcast says, be authentic, right? I think that's really important. Be yourself. When I coach students all the time, being yourself is so essential. Not trying to maybe impress. Yes, you want to impress, don't get me wrong, because you want to get accepted, but you still have to be yourself.
Yeah.
I think that's important.
The one thing we say about that is that not every university, school, organization, job is ready to receive your authenticity, right? And that tells you something. If you are yourself and they don't receive you well, then that might not be the best fit. So like what I tell my son all the time is just be who you are. And if they're not ready to receive that, then it's not a good fit, and that's okay. And I think oftentimes with any interview, whether it's for a job or an application process, how they receive you will tell you a lot. And I think an interview needs to go both ways. It's not just whether or not they accept you, it's also whether or not you want to ultimately accept them.
I totally agree with that. I had a student who went through the process, and upon returning from the interview, the student and the family was adamant this wasn't going to be the right fit. And there were a couple different factors that led to that. And later in the process, the school came back and they were kind of curious why this child wasn't applying. Because in their perspective, they really liked this child. And their response was, please just give us another chance. We heard you. It was great. You were able to share with us, where the challenges were, what maybe didn't go right. And they gave us another chance. And that student is at that school today and thriving.
Yeah.
But it was about,
And that takes a lot of growth on the part of the school as well, right? And I think going back to my son with the college experience, he had one school that he thought was going to be his school. Before we went to campus, he had his number one, and he was so excited the morning of. We were going to that campus, and within 5 minutes of being on campus, he said, I don't know that this is the right fit. And as we learned more, he learned it's not the right fit. And he was so discouraged. And I just said, we've got other schools. It's okay. That's what this whole thing is for. You're not making a decision today. You're just seeing if there's others you want to pursue more. And he ended up finding his school. But I remember how distressing it was at first, because what he thought was going to be his school ended up not being his school, right? And I'm sure for that student, they thought it was going to be the school, and then they had the interview and said, maybe not. But then the school was big enough to come back and say, we heard you, give us a chance. And now the student's thriving. And I think as people, we often will write things off as, okay, it just wasn't a good fit, instead of talking through it. And it's so important. I think your student just showed a lot of us how we can give people another chance or try again.
Like Megan, you referenced the idea I mentioned about when you get in the car and you might be having the conversation with your son, and you said beforehand sometimes, right, as you're walking to the car. And that is so true. And so I'll give you an example. It's one of the things I do with my students is I ask them to reach out to me, just a simple text. So after they've had the interview, and it could be when they're walking to the car and they get in the car, because I want to know their authentic response right off the bat before they've had a conversation, because I understand your parents, it's going to be influential. And I want to know their gut instinct right off the bat, what they thought. And it is interesting where sometimes it does occur where I have this really positive feedback from the student about the experience, and then maybe a parent, maybe not so much. But this way, I don't want the child to be swayed. I want them just to quickly, what's your gut instinct? And let's not worry about spelling, or just send me a quick text. And I think that system was worked really well.
Love that. Love that. Okay, last quick question. Do you prefer a live conversation or a structured interview?
And I'm a face-to-face, I'm a people person, so I'm good with the live.
Yeah. Awesome.
I love that. I mean, like I said, just the idea to have a conversation and flow, see where it flows, see where it goes.
Absolutely. I just really want to thank you for this conversation. It's been phenomenal. And you reminded us that authenticity is not something that we perfect. It's something we practice through experience. For those listening, you can learn more about Dr. Quebec's work at quebec-consulting.com. We'll put the link in the show notes. Explore his additional platforms, including Why Boarding School and Pre-Prep Showcase, and connect with him on LinkedIn and Instagram, all linked in the show notes. Before we go, is there one sentence that you would like to leave our listeners with?
Great question. One sentence. That's a tough one. Well, I guess in true spirit, Megan, of your podcast, I think I've had a great opportunity to listen and even watch some of your podcasts on YouTube. I think you're doing a great job, and I'm really enjoying them. And I guess in spirit of your podcast, I would say be authentic, be yourself.
Love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Is there
Megan.
anything else that you would like to share with our audience before we wrap up for the day?
No, as you mentioned, I appreciate you sharing my websites, and certainly feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or connect with me online. And for those who might be interested in boarding school and maybe just want to kind of be curious about it, feel free to check out my podcast, which is Why Boarding School. My audience has now just reached 100 countries. And so that's whyboardingschool.com. And so I don't monetize it, and I do as a service to help people out, and gives you an opportunity to do a deep dive into school. So feel free to check it out. And if you have any questions, please reach out. I'd be happy to help you.
I love that. And I really hope people will take you up on that offer. I think just having the conversation to see what opportunities are out there and what options are available for our students is so critical. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone listening. If this episode gave you permission to stop waiting to feel ready and start showing up as you are, I hope you carry that forward. I'm Megan Fucciarelli, the Authenticity Amplifier. And until next time, keep showing up, keep growing, and keep amplifying authenticity in every conversation. Until next time.